Okay, if you recall last week, we kind of put the historical context for the book of Ezekiel. And we talked about the fact that the book of Ezekiel is written over a 20-year period. And the 20 years that it's written over is a period of really hard times. Tell me, does anybody remember historically what the context is for the book of Ezekiel?
The Jewish exiles in Babylon.
Good.
In the first 32 chapters of the book, because while the people have been taken captive as a punishment for their sins, he prophesies that Jerusalem will soon be captured. It was. And that as a result, more captives will be soon arriving. The final 16 chapters take place after the fall of Jerusalem. Here Ezekiel changes his message from one of warning to one of hope, telling the eventual restoration of the people of their land and the eventual salvation of all God's people in the end times.
There you go. So think about the book of Ezekiel like a wine press. A wine press is, it's got these two arms on the outside, and they just keep pressing toward the inside. And that's what's happening with the book of Ezekiel. On the extremes of the book, our great hope, but in the very center of the book, chapter 24, which is the middle chapter of the entire book of Ezekiel, you get to the point where finally the winepress hands meet and they press Israel down. So what you have is you have a group of people who for some reason God believes need to have that pressure of that press. And the very book of Ezekiel is built just like that. The middle chapter of the book is where you find Israel finally broken. Now you also need to understand that Israel has been divided now twice. This morning, I always remember, is it Charlton or Charleston? Charlton said this morning that in 722 BC something happened to the northern tribes. Do you remember that? What did he say happened? Israel has 12 tribes, right? Had 12 tribes. The 10 in the north, something happened to them in 722 BC.
They were conquered, and part of the cream of the crop were taken away.
That's exactly right. And I talked about what happened. It happened by a nation called Assyria. You're supposed to be able to read that. And in 722 they were captured, and those 10 tribes disappeared. I mean, Charles said that some people were taken away, many people were taken away, and lots of Assyrians were brought back in and dumped right in the middle of it. And they became, for all intents and purposes, a lost nation. In fact, if you are familiar with the Mormon religion, they will tell you that the American Indians are really the lost 10 tribes of Israel. I mean, they have a lot of problems when it comes to DNA. But that whole idea of 10 tribes just going and disappearing has become a big issue for a lot of folks, because it's really kind of, how do you lose a whole nation? But they did. They lost a whole nation. And so we also talked about how the southern tribes of Judah, those two tribes in the southern, were really desperately in trouble. And along came Isaiah and Hezekiah, and they were able to faithfully survive that. But they also pointed to a time when Israel would then go into another, or Judah would go into another period of captivity, and that's going to be in Babylon. So we're talking today, the whole book of Ezekiel is about that time they were in Babylon. So I talked about the fact that in 605 BC, Assyria was destroyed, a new kingdom called Babylon was coming into place, and they were attacked, and there was a deportation of some folks over it. And we talked about some of the people who went in the first deportation. Who was that?
Daniel and
Meshach.
And all those buddies, they all went into Babylon, and they began. And so we're going to start in just a second in Daniel 7. Okay? So go ahead and turn to Daniel 7 while I'm telling you the rest of the story. And then a few years later, while a vassal king from Babylon is controlling Jerusalem and all their places, and all of Judah, they rebel again, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, comes back in and he takes them again in 597 BC. And he is so fed up with them that he grabs a bunch of people, up to 10,000 people out of Judah, and he just ships them all to Babylon. Included in that is a 25-year-old priest by the name of Ezekiel. And I told you that the book of Ezekiel begins 5 years later because Ezekiel turns 30 the day when a priest would normally start his time in the temple. But what we find is that Ezekiel is all the way over in Babylon. He does not get to serve in the temple. What's a priest supposed to do when he can't serve in the temple? Is he worthless? Are you worthless? Is there something that has happened in your life that you believe has taken your ability to do what God made you to do, and you believe, I am now abandoned by God. I am now not useful for my purpose anymore. Have I disqualified myself from being able to serve God? And the book of Ezekiel should tell you that the answer to all those is a resounding no. Because last week we talked about what the first chapter of Ezekiel means. Do you remember what happened in the first chapter of Ezekiel?
There was a vision.
There was a vision, and what did we see in that vision?
4 strange figures.
Yeah, 4 strange figures that we identified later as being just like some 4 strange figures we saw in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 4, right? What were those 4 strange creatures? What?
Tiger.
Well, there was lion, ox, there was, but each of those things had four faces, right?
Right.
And so what were those creatures that had 4 faces and wings that stretched out and touched one another? What were they?
Cherubim.
Cherubim. Who were what? What are the cherubim? What are the cherubim? Yeah, what are they?
Over the mercy seat.
There are depictions of cherubim over the mercy seat, but the cherubim are actually real.
Are they angels?
They're angels. They're angels. They are those who are right at the throne room of God. We saw that in Revelation 4. And they live ever saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And in the book of Ezekiel, we don't see them in heaven, do we? Nor do we see them in Jerusalem, where we would expect to find them because that's where the temple is, where he said that his name would dwell forever. God said that. We see them where?
In Babylon.
In Babylon, of all places. How awful is Babylon? How righteous is Babylon? Let's put that. How righteous is Babylon? Not at all. How worthy is Babylon to hold the name and the throne of God? Not at all. So why does God appear in Babylon?
He goes where his people go.
You know, he goes where his people go. And there's something different about the picture of God in Ezekiel that doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. Those cherubim have something very different about them, really strange. Do you remember what it is?
Wheels.
And-
They have eyes.
And the wheels have eyes. What do the wheels look like? Are they just normal wheels that go around? What do they look like? They're wheels and wheels. And so when they want to turn, how do they do it?
They all turn as one unit.
They never turn.
Oh, I'm thinking together.
But I understand what you're saying, but do these guys ever turn?
They just go which
You
direction
mean
they
like
want.
rolling?
And when they go, which direction do they always go?
Forward.
Forward.
Always forward. And so the point that you have from that is this, folks. When you have been in a situation where you believe that you are in the consequences of your sin, and you deserve to be right where you sit, you need to remember that there's a God who will come to you. That's always what true religion is. God comes down to you. And when you believe that you are so behind that you can never catch up to God, you need to understand that if you are sitting with the all-living God, every move is always forward. I have been, and so probably have you, in a circumstance where you feel like, I'm so far backward here that there's no way I can ever get back where I need to be. I am so far down a pit that there's no way out. And what God tells you is, in Ezekiel is, I will come to you. And if you will acknowledge me, every step you have ever taken and every step you will take, as long as you're tied to me, is forward. There will always be hope for you because your God is always going to be with you. He will come to you in the midst of the consequences of all your sin. And he will bring you out. And that's exactly what your God told these folks. The very first time, at this moment right here, 6:05, a man, not Ezekiel, but a man named Jeremiah, he made a prophecy. And it was a prophecy that said, all of you who are going to Babylon with King Nebuchadnezzar, this period of captivity will last exactly 70 years. And then he gave what is probably one of the most hopeful passages of Scripture that you will ever hear. In fact, I was looking at the Messina Valley Christian Annual the other day, and the parents were writing things to their parents. Almost every parent to the one used this very same scripture, Jeremiah 29. I think it's like 9 through 11.
Behold, I know the plans I have for you.
Well, it's slower.
Behold, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future, declares the Lord.
Right. See, that's what God said when he sent them there. And that's what he's saying to you. I know the plans I have for you. You don't. You may think all this is just punishment because you deserve it. But your God is telling you, I need you to listen to me. I know the plans I have for you. They're plans to prosper you and not to harm you. They're plans to give you hope and a future. What would you think? What would you think if God took you out of Las Cruces today and he put you into prison, and your prison was in as far away from Las Cruces as you could imagine, where none of your family could be there? In fact, what if in the midst of that, most of your family were dead? And he set you in prison, and your sentence was a life sentence. Would you be able to accept that scripture? Behold, I know the plans I have for you. Not to harm you, but to prosper you. Plans to give you a hope and a future, declares the Lord Almighty. Well, that's what he's asking them to believe here. So that's the context of the scriptures that we're talking about. Now, we're going to read Daniel 7 here in a second, because something is happening at the very same time that Ezekiel is speaking. There's another guy who's very prominent in the country of Babylon right then. His name is Daniel. And Daniel is prophesying and doing a lot of great things. Think of all the things that Daniel did. Okay, just somebody recount for me anything you can remember that Daniel did during that same period, in that same country, not in Jerusalem, not in Judah, but all the way over 2 widths of New Mexico away in Babylon. What do you remember Daniel doing?
Interpreting dreams.
Okay, tell me about one of those dreams, can you? Can you remember them? Can you? You're absolutely right. So I'll give you some help.
I know one of the dreams, it's about a statue.
Yep. Tell me
It
about
had
the statue.
It had different, the gold top was gold,
Right?
the middle section was brass or iron. The
Okay.
legs
The
were
middle section is bronze.
bronze, yeah, bronze. And the thighs were iron and his feet were clay.
Actually, the legs are iron and clay.
Right.
This is brass. This is actually, I think this is silver actually. It's gold, silver, brass, iron, and clay. Okay? Who had this dream? Do you remember?
Nebuchadnezzar had a
Right?
dream.
Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. Nobody could interpret it, and that young boy, Daniel, from that upstart nation of Israel, comes in and says, well, they're going to kill all the wise men anyway, because nobody can remember, nobody can tell him what the dream is, and nobody can interpret it, so I might as well go. And he says, I can't tell you what the dream is, but my God can. And so he tells him the dream. And what does the dream mean?
It's predicting the coming of the kingdoms.
Yeah,
And the one at the top, the gold one, is Babylon.
right?
And that's going to be superseded by the next one, Syria,
Medo-Persia.
and Medo-Persia, and then
The
Greek-
third one, which represents the brass down here,
Right, and then the Greek one,
is Greek.
yes,
It's Greece.
yes, and then the final one, the next one down is the Roman Empire.
Ends up being Rome.
Yeah.
And so you've got this amazing dream that Daniel's telling. Now, Daniel has another dream similar to that in chapter 7. Okay, we're going to talk about that real quick. And so in chapter 7, you have Daniel dreaming of 4 beasts. And those 4 beasts end up meaning basically the same thing. You have a lion, a bear, a leopard, right? And what's the 4th one? I forget. There's a goat. Yeah, anyway, I don't want to get into all, because I didn't go back and read this before I did it, because my point is that there are those 4 beasts represent those same 4 kingdoms. So what you have is, you've got God making some amazing prophecies that don't happen and don't come about for hundreds of years. It's basically in the late 500s when Daniel's making these prophecies, which come about in the first one comes about in about 530. The second one comes about with Medo-Persia, and then there's Greece, and he even describes the Greek animal as a leopard. It's the fastest animal in the world, which is just like Alexander the Great, who sweeps across the world and takes it. And then you have Rome being described, which is incredibly accurate when you talk about them being iron and clay. I guess what I'm telling you is that your God is doing some amazing prophesying through Daniel in Babylon. Why? Why? And then you have an amazing prophecy coming, an amazing description that comes about in Daniel 7 at about verse 11. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. So in other words, folks, all those 4 kingdoms are going to come to an abrupt halt. All going to be stripped of their authority. And then he says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority and glory and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. His description is just like the description that we saw of the son of that bronzed, fiery man in Ezekiel. Okay, so you've got Daniel with an epiphany at the very same time, and then if you go back over to Ezekiel, let's go back to Ezekiel. I want you to look at all the times in the book of Ezekiel. You have the same picture of this amazing man that appears. All right. Let's just go through and look at some of them. Look at, in chapter 1, verse 27, I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds of a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And then, if you look again, folks, in chapter 3, verse 23, so I got up and went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory I had seen by the Kibar River. And I fell face down. And then if you keep going over to chapter 8, in chapter 8, verse 2, I looked and I saw a figure like that of a man from what appeared to be his waist down. It was like fire. And from there up his appearance was as bright as glowing metal. He stretched out what looked like a hand and took me by the hair of my head. The Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and in visions of God he took me to Jerusalem. And if you keep going over, chapter 10, I looked and I saw the likeness of the throne of sapphire above the expanse that was over the heads of the cherubim. The Lord said to the man clothed in linen, go in among the wheels, blah, 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 blah. Then go on to chapter 10 and verse 19. They stopped at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the Lord of Israel was above them. Verse 20, these were the living creatures I had seen beneath the God of Israel by the Kibar River, and I realized that they were cherubim. Each had 4 faces and 4 wings, and under their wings was what looked like the hands of a man. Their faces had the appearance as those who I had seen by the Kibar River. Each one went straight ahead. Then in chapter 11, verse 22, then the cherubim with the wheels beside them spread their wings, and the glory of the Lord of Israel was above them. I'm going to stop. How many times is Ezekiel seeing a manifestation of the Shekinah glory of God? Over and over and over again. When else do you see this happen in the Bible? You see Moses with a burning bush, right? When else does God appear to anybody aside from when you see those instances where he is in the temple or in the tent of meeting? I don't remember any. Moses goes up on the mountain, sees him, right? But this is happening over and over and over again. Because the question is why? Why is God appearing so often in this period of time that they're in Babylon?
To remind his people that he's there.
To give them hope.
What does it
That
say?
he's in control.
What does it say to you about your God that he does this?
He cares.
Maybe that's more. Maybe that means more to me. I don't know. I do a lot of medical malpractice law. That's my job. And I can tell you that sometimes I will read a medical chart and a doctor, you can see this doctor, he'll have a patient come into his office and he's been smoking all of his life, he's been drinking all of his life, he's been not living the way he needs to live, had been keeping himself in good shape. He goes in to see the doctor, he waits hours to see the doctor sees him for 3 or 4 minutes, and the doctor is pretty blunt with him. You're in this situation because of what you've done. Well, I see records of doctors who act a lot differently too. I see records of doctors who give amazing and marvelous care to people who do that to themselves. But imagine this. Imagine you're that person, that man or that woman. You've got all kinds of diseases that were brought on by your own conduct. And before you can go to the doctor, before you get put in the hospital, a physician comes to your ratty little trailer house, lets himself in, and he spends all day with you there and all night with you there. And that physician leaves, and then the next day comes back again and spends all day with you, and leaves and comes back, and then he waits the night with you while you deal with it. But you know what? You don't deserve this, because you're in that situation because you ate badly, you didn't exercise, you smoked, you drank, and all those problems that you have are all yours. But the physician keeps coming back and keeps caring for you. What does that say to you about the physician?
That he considers you worthy to keep living, not to give up on you.
How much value does that place in you to know that physician is willing to do that for you? How valuable is a physician's time? Those are your greatest opportunities. They are not the people who have pushed God farthest away, even if they think they have. Those are the times that God is most ready to be appearing in their lives. The period of the most profound and frequent epiphanies in the Bible occur to a people that everybody else had given up hope on. In fact, they've given up hope in themselves. So, I want to explain something to you, because they had a terrible, terrible misconception about who they were. If you will, I want to take you through chapter 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 really quickly, because I want you to understand something. In chapter 8, this is about a year after the first epiphany of God. And God appears again to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's sitting by the gates with the elders. And God takes him in a vision, and he transfers him right to the gates of Jerusalem. Okay, and we just read some of that. And in chapter 8 and about verse 5, he's standing at the gates of Jerusalem, at the entrance to the temple. And in verse 5 it says, "Then he said, Son of man, look toward the north. So I looked, and the entrance north of the gate of the altar, I saw this idol of jealousy. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they're doing? The utterly detestable things the house of Israel is doing here? Things that will drive me far from my sanctuary? And you will see things that are even more detestable. Then he brought me to the entrance to the court. I looked, and I saw a hole in the wall. He said to me, Son of man, now dig into the wall. So I dug into the wall, and I saw a doorway there." So he said, what's going on? In this vision, God's saying, Ezekiel, I want you to look at these people. And he looked, and he said, they're doing the most detestable things. They're the priests. Now I want you to dig in the wall. So in the vision, Ezekiel's digging in the wall of the temple. And what does he see? And he said to me, verse 9, "Go in and see the wicked and detestable things they are doing there." So I went in and looked, and I saw betrayed over the walls all kinds of crawling things and detestable animals and all the idols of the house of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of the house of Israel. And Jazanah, son of Shaphan, was standing among them. Each had a censer in his hand and a fragrant cloud of incense. He said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the darkness? Each at the shrine of his own idol. They say, The Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. Again he said, You will see them doing things that are even more detestable. Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw a woman sitting there mourning for Tammuz. He said to me, Do you see this, son of man? You see the things that are even more detestable than this? He then brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and there at the entrance of the temple, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, their faces toward the sun, and they were bowing down to the sun in the east. So they're using the very temple of God to worship the sun. So as he's digging deeper and deeper into the temple worship, Ezekiel's seeing more and more detestable things. And so what happens is God shows Ezekiel that these people who are the elders and leaders are dying, are going to die. And Ezekiel's response is really interesting. In chapter 9, verse 9, he says, "The sin of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. The land is full of bloodshed, and the city is full of injustice. They say, the Lord has forsaken the land, the Lord does not see. So I will not look on them with pity or spare them, but I will bring down on their own heads what they have done." And the man in linen with a written kit at his side brought back word saying, "I have done as you've commanded." In other words, he'd gone into the whole city, and there was nobody worthy. And so the very response of Ezekiel is despair. And he says in chapter 11, verse 13, "Now as I was prophesying, Pelatiah, son of Benaiah, died." And that's one of the leaders. And Ezekiel says, "Then I fell face down and cried out in a loud voice, 'Ah, sovereign Lord, will you completely destroy the remnant of Israel?' The word of the Lord came to me, 'Son of man, your brothers who are your blood relatives and the whole house of Israel are those of whom the people of Jerusalem has said, they are far away from the Lord. This land was given to us as our possession.'" All right, it's a lot of reading. Now let me interpret it. Ezekiel's looking at what's going on in Jerusalem, how evil things are, and the sentence of God is, "I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to destroy them all." And Ezekiel's greatest fear, he says that his greatest fear is that the entire remnant is going to be destroyed, that nothing is going to be left. And God says, "You've been listening, Ezekiel, to the people in Jerusalem. Because the people in Jerusalem are saying this, that all of you in Babylon are abandoned by God. We in Jerusalem are the remnant." In fact, if you look at chapter 11 and go back to verse 3, he actually quotes what the people in Jerusalem are saying. They're saying, "Will it not soon be time to build houses? This city is a cooking pot, and we are the meat." And in chapter 24, they're going to say, "We are the choice cuts." In other words, all of us who are in Jerusalem, we're the good guys. God saved us. Those people in Babylon, God's given up on them. Completely given up on them. We are the good people. And isn't all this land given to us as our possession? So now, God says, you think, Ezekiel, because of what happened, that those people who were left in Jerusalem must have been more righteous and more full of and have reason to hope. And all of you in Babylon are absolutely out of luck, away from God and abandoned. And God comes back and says, "You're 100% wrong, Ezekiel. The remnant is in Babylon."
What?
The remnant is in Babylon. Why would God leave the unrighteous that he has destined for destruction in Jerusalem? Why would he take the remnant to Babylon? I'll give you a scripture. I'm not going to take time to look at it. But 2 Kings 21, 12 through 15 makes it really clear that it's the remnant that was taken to Babylon. Why is God taking the remnant to Babylon and leaving the unrighteous alone in Jerusalem?
They thought that the temple was where God dwelled, and he's showing them that's not the case.
These terrible idolaters live in Jerusalem. And so God allows them to stay there. But why would you pull the remnant away from Jerusalem and set them in Babylon. What purpose could God possibly have for that?
Teach them about discipline, the consequences of their offense.
Just to get their attention.
It's to humble them, like Anthony said. It's to get their attention, like you said. We oftentimes mistake the circumstance that we're in. We feel like it must mean that God has given up on me. But in fact, what it really means is God's chosen me as part of the remnant. And I am here because He is changing me. In fact, one of the things that come out in Ezekiel 1 is this whole idea that God is not in Jerusalem. God is here in Babylon with us. When you go to the very last chapter of the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel 48, we've had 8 chapters right at this point in Ezekiel 48 that describe this amazing new temple. And at the very end of Ezekiel 48, they describe Jerusalem. And the very last thing is that God renamed Jerusalem. The very last thing He does in the book of He renames Jerusalem. And the new name of the city from that time on is called Yahweh Shammah, which means the Lord is there.
Can you spell that for me?
Y-A-W, was it Y-A-H-W-E-H, S-H-A-M-M-A-H.
Give me that last word, S-H.
S-H-A-M-A-H.
Yahweh Shammah.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Which is an awful lot like Yerushalayim. God changes the city's name in the end of Ezekiel. Why? And the name of the city is "The Lord is there." See, Jerusalem came from that old priest named Melchizedek, who was the king of Salem,
Yeah.
which means the king of peace. But now Jerusalem has a new name in the end of when the new temple gets built there at the end of it. And it's "The Lord is there." There's a great passage in Jeremiah 23, 23. Let's read that. What does it say? Am I only a God nearby, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Your God is a God who is near and far. Your God is a God who is always there. And even when you are in the midst of a circumstance, He is saying, I am there. I am there. When you feel like your God is not near you, I can tell you, I talked to a woman who was in the midst of depression just yesterday. And she said, I feel so far away from God. I just don't believe that I could possibly be blessed by Him because I feel so far away. And yet she was doing her best to live a life that was righteous. I said, don't believe that lie. Your God longs to draw near, no matter if you think that you're way over there. Your God is near and He is far away. He's everywhere you need Him to be. Now, I want to go back to Ezekiel and I want to read these passages and then we're going to close. read a couple of chapters in Ezekiel because I want you to understand the kind of God Ezekiel is. So we're going to start right after chapter 1. We're going to read 2 and 3. Okay? So remember in the last verse that Ezekiel's fallen on his face down. That's what everybody does when they see God. And then in chapter 2, verse 1, he said to me, Son of man. Now I just want you to know, the words Son of Man come up 93 times in the book of Ezekiel. It's the most often used phrase to describe Ezekiel. And you should recognize Son of Man is a term of humility. It says, I recognize who I am. I am not God. There's only one God, and I am not him. I am merely a son of man. But recognize this as well, that Jesus assumed that title.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jesus appeared to Daniel, Daniel said, you know what he looks like? He looks like a son of man. We should tell you that the promise to you is if you will assume the role of the most humble man on your knees, God will exalt you like he did Jesus. So he said to me, Son of man, stand up on your feet and I will speak to you. So he's telling Ezekiel to stand. But then in verse 2, as he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet. And I heard him speaking to me. I want you to pay attention to that. Every time that God asked Ezekiel to do something, in the next 2 chapters, it's going to say the Spirit raised me. When God asks something of you, he will put the Spirit within you to do it. He said in verse 3, Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I am sending you are an obstinate and stubborn people. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. And whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, Son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Do not be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you and you live among scorpions. Do not be afraid of what they say or be terrified by them, though they are a rebellious house. You must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are rebellious. But you, Son of man, listen to what I say to you. Do not rebel like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. Then I looked and I saw a hand stretched out to me, and it was a scroll which he unrolled before me. On both sides of it were written words of lament and mourning and woe. He said to me, Son of man, eat what is before you. Eat the scroll. Then go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. Then he said to me, Son of man, eat the scroll I am giving you, and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. Then he said to me, Son of man, go now to the house of Israel and speak my words to them. You are not being sent to a people of obscure speech and difficult language, but to the house of Israel. Not to many peoples of obscure speech and difficult language, whose words you cannot understand. Surely if I had sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the house of Israel is not willing to listen to me. For the whole house of Israel is hardened and obstinate. But I will make you. I want you to stop. I want you to think about this. This is the passage I really want you to get. Because Ezekiel's name is hidden in here. I will make you as unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious house. Ezekiel's name means God hardens or God strengthens. God says, you're going to a stubborn and obstinate people, but do not be afraid of them. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. If your God gives you a task, He will equip you for the task to the point where it will become your very name. That's how thoroughly He will equip you. It will be from your birth. He will have begun equipping you just like He did Ezekiel. Your God never will abandon you, either in your sin or in the tasks that He has put forth for you. And He will not just not abandon you, He will equip you. He will make you as hard as flint. And He said to me, Son of man, listen carefully and take to heart all the words I speak to you. Go now to your countrymen in exile. That's His audience. His audience is not those folks over in Jerusalem, two widths of New Mexico away, 1,000 miles away. Your audience are to all those folks who are remnants of the remnant, all those castaways, all those ne'er-do-wells who are in Babylon now. That's your audience. It's not your job to preach to those folks over in Jerusalem. It's your job to preach to the people who are in exile. And speak to them, say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, whether they listen or fail to listen. And that is your job as well. It's not your job to teach people, because teaching requires the hearers to grab it. It's your job to do whatever God has put in front of you, whatever that may be. Then the Spirit, what? Lifted me up. And I heard behind me a loud rumbling sound. May the glory of the Lord be praised in His dwelling place. Where is God's dwelling place?
Wherever He is.
Wherever He is. See, and the point is that, as Moses said in the only psalm he ever wrote, Lord, our dwelling place has been in You. No matter wherever we wander, it's been in You. And God is sitting right over here with Ezekiel in Babylon saying, I'm right here. And Ezekiel's giving God praise because his dwelling place is right there. And what's really beautiful about this is that where does Ezekiel, once God gives him this commission, where does Ezekiel hear the glory of the Lord? Where, approximately in that passage, does Ezekiel hear the glory of the Lord? Verse 12.
Behind Him.
Behind Him. If God gives you a task, He will always, always guard your vanguard. He is behind you, making sure that nothing can touch you where you're weakest. He is behind you. He is before you. He is around you. He's leading you, and He will never leave you vulnerable. The sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing against each other and the sound of the wheels beside them was a loud rumbling sound. The Spirit then lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness and in the anger of my spirit with the strong hand of the Lord upon me. I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Abib, near the Kibar River. Tel Abib. Does that sound familiar? The word Abib also is pronounced in Hebrew, Aviv. Tel Aviv, which means mound of destruction in Babylonian. But in Hebrew it means hills of grain. In the language of the unrighteous, your name may be just mud. But when it's spoken by God and God's people, your name can mean fruitfulness and the ability to multiply and to feed and to sustain. It's a hill of grain when spoken in God's language. when spoken in man's language, it may just mean destruction and worthlessness. So, what God is trying to tell you is that you allow me to name you. You allow me to declare your purpose. You allow me to define where you are and who you are. Because if you allow men to do it, they'll just say, you're just a big bump on a log. You're the hill of destruction. But if God gets to name you, he'll say, you are the hill that sustains thousands of people for fruitfulness and nutrition. And there, where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, overwhelmed, says Ezekiel. It just so happens that Leviticus 8, 1 through 33 says that when a priest is called, that priest has a period of ordination that lasts for 7 days. And this becomes Ezekiel's 7-day ordination here. And all he can do is just sit there overwhelmed. See, Ezekiel, I'm sure, always dreamed that he would get to serve God in the temple. And then he got yanked out of Babylon and thrown in the midst of this very sinful people with no hope. He'd never be ordained to be a real priest because of the sin of the people. And now, surprise, surprise, he didn't just get to be a priest. He's seen the glory of God over and over and over again, where his forefathers had never seen it. Do you realize that in the midst of your sin, the opportunities for you to see the Lord are greater? All he's asking for you to do is just be willing to be the Son of Man and get on your knees. Just get on your knees. Recognize where you are. And say, use me. Use me. So in verse 16, at the end of the 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them a warning from me. And then in verse 22, the hand of the Lord was upon me there, and he said to me, get up and go out to the plain, and there I will speak to you. So I got up and went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory I had seen by the Kibar River, and I fell face down. Then the Spirit came unto me and raised me to my feet. He spoke to me and said, go shut yourself inside your house, and you, Son of Man, they will tie with ropes. You will be bound so that you cannot go out among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth so that you will be silent and unable to rebuke them, though they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth, and you shall say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. So what happens to Ezekiel is God has now begun asking Ezekiel to do some really crazy things. The first thing he has to do is go in your house, and we're going to tie you all up, Ezekiel. And you're not going to be able to speak. And Ezekiel cannot speak from this point on until chapter 32. Except when God tells him to. If God puts words in his mouth, then Ezekiel can speak. But otherwise, Ezekiel is dumb. Sometimes God asks you to do some really bizarre things. In fact, in the book of Ezekiel, in the next time we meet, we're going to talk about many of the bizarre things that God has asked Ezekiel to do, including laying on one side for 390 days. Why would your God ask you, as one of his servants, to do such bizarre things? Why would he ask bizarre things of you?
To see if you really love him. by obeying him.
Yeah, I think that could possibly be, it could be a test. I think one of the things you remember, do you remember God says, Ezekiel, I'm going to make you a sign for these people. What's he a sign of?
And that God is there and that he's in control.
He's a sign of God. He has become a representation of God's personality and character. And as a sign of God's personality and character, he's showing the links that God is willing to go to communicate with you. If he's asking Ezekiel to lay on his side for 390 days, what's he willing to do himself? Ezekiel's just a tiny sign of the real thing. What links is God willing to go to? Amazing links to communicate to you a truth about him. So, he's going to ask amazing things of Ezekiel, but he's not going to say, Ezekiel, good luck getting that done. He says, I'm going to make your forehead as hard as flint. You will be hard enough for every task I put in front of you, but I'll ask a lot of tough things. But when we get to chapter 24, you're going to see a very, very hard story. So hard it's going to be difficult to read. But never, ever believe that God would not do more than he's asking Ezekiel to do in chapter 24. Okay, now, I guess the last thing I would want to say and talk about is the people of Judah who have been yanked out of their life and taken literally, in some cases, with hooks through their cheeks to Babylon, are there. And they're weeping and mourning, like I talked about last week, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down. And there we remembered Zion. All those wicked people said, they carried us away into captivity, they said, sing for us a song. And the people didn't want to sing a song. They had no joy in their hearts, despair in the midst of God's discipline and God's punishment and God's calling you to be part of the remnant is a real risk. So I want you to turn to chapters Isaiah 61, and we're going to read that and then we're going to close. Isaiah talks about this near the end of his when he is actually talking about the people in Babylon. So the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. Now, Isaiah lives 150 years before Babylon. But he talks about a coming time when they're going to be in Babylon all the time. He says, he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. And a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting for the Lord, for the display of his splendor. What's happening in Babylon is exactly that. He is planting them there so that they can become oaks, and he will transplant them later where he needs them to be. So he wants you to know that no matter what's going on in your life, no matter where you feel like you have been uprooted, do not doubt your God, because he wants to put oil of gladness and the spirit of praise in you, and not a spirit of despair, because he will take you and he will plant you so that you can be an oak